Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm the one that has to call everybody to order. Thank you, everyone, for attending our symposium. I just want to thank everyone, thank staff for making this happen. And if you heard Dr. Levine's speech this morning, we clearly have some challenges ahead of us, but I am hopeful and excited about the future of higher education because I think we have the right people in the right positions doing phenomenal work. So I'm very excited for the state of Kentucky and higher education. For our last session of the day, we have 4 legislators who will provide us a look at what we can expect during the 2023 legislative session. Our panelists are Senator Robert Stivers, President Robert Stivers, Senator Minority Caucus Chair Reginald Thomas, Representative James Tipton is also chair of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Post-Secondary Education. President Stivers isn't here. Sorry. On education, and I didn't know if who's joining us, and House Minority Caucus Chair Derrick Graham. Today's moderator is Laura Cullen Glasscock. She is editor and publisher of the Kentucky Gazette, which is a nonpartisan independent journal that covers state government, politics, and public affairs. Laura, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone for being here. I appreciate it. And while the service staff is cleaning up, I think we should all thank them as someone who waited tables and tended bar to pay for my graduate degrees. I know the hard work that they're putting in doing this. As Lucas said, this is the final panel of the day. We're going to talk politics for a little bit, but not really politics, more public policy. And thank you to the panel for being here. So as we get started, I'd like to have a conversation rather than a Q&A with you gentlemen, if that's okay. And Dr. Thompson has agreed to sit in since Senator Stivers is unavailable to be here this afternoon. So we appreciate that. He'll provide a little more context for us, I think. So as we get started, I have want to ask a fairly broad question of you gentlemen, please. So the CPE's strategic plan is entitled Higher Education Matters, and that plan runs through the year 2030. That's 8 years from now. So high school freshmen will be finishing their college degrees if they go to college, or if they get another credential, they'll likely be in the workforce at that point. So I'd like to ask you, thinking of these 14-year-olds, what is their journey going to look like? What can they expect as they move through these last few years of their education? Representative Graham, do you mind to start?
Oh, I don't mind to start. First of all, as I came to the building to come to this, I was reminded of the fact that it was my legislation that sponsored you being here today. So you can take that. I think the thing that we have to address is what we've gone through in the last 2 years in education and how to bring these kids who are far behind in math and science because of the way in which they were being taught during this pandemic. And we have to address that and address it early. I do believe that our students will prevail, but I also need to emphasize that we as a legislative body need to focus on making sure that our comprehensive as well as our research universities are appropriated and we get back to where we were prior to, I believe, 2006 when we began to cut the budgets of our post-secondary education. So we need to address that so that we can take on the challenge of what we know we will have in the future, particularly since the period of time that we've gone through this pandemic.
I was just thinking about when I was a high school freshman. I won't tell you how many years ago that was, what I was thinking about. But today's students, high school freshmen, the world is so much different. And the one thing that I want them to understand is there are opportunities out there for them. And I think the challenge we have in the education community, whether it be in post-secondary, whether it be in K-12, or even in pre-K, is letting those students know, learn how to have hope. They need to understand there are challenges out there, there are opportunities out there. Oftentimes I'll go talk to groups of students and I'll make this comment to them. You'll be working in jobs in the future that haven't so important that we in the education world, we have to adapt to these changes and adapt to the needs of the students. And I think that's what we really got to focus on. It's helping these students adapt to changes and prepare them for the challenges they're going to face in the future.
So if I could ask a quick follow-up, how do we help them adapt from a policy perspective?
I think one of the things that students need is they need information. We talk a lot about college affordability, and I think one of the reasons that we have students who maybe have such large student loan debts is they don't understand the consequences. The way they schedule the classes, majors they take, the careers you're looking into. So I think it's important for us to give them the information and have the personnel in place to help them disseminate that information and understand it.
Okay, thank you.
I think, can I
Yeah,
follow
yeah,
up with that?
yeah.
And that's what our high schools need to focus on, to make sure that students, if not be the requirement, that they also know the responsibilities of when you borrow money, you pay it back, and be careful about how you spend that money while you are attending college. So I think it starts really when they get to the high school, that the high school emphasizes those things, and possibly make finance one of those courses that every student needs to take.
Thank you. Senator Thomas.
Well, Laura, I appreciate what Representative Graham and Representative Tipton said, but I'm going to come at it at a totally different way. I think we're at an inflection point in America in so many ways, and certainly college is one of them. I really think the policy that we're seeing being adopted across this nation and in various states is that we're no longer looking at a K through 12 model anymore. We're really looking at providing education from pre-K to at least 14. I think that's where we're going in this society. And we're doing that here in Kentucky with the Kentucky Work Ready Scholarship now. We're basically saying that for those students who want to go on to grades 13 and 14, we will find a way to pay for that with regard to STEM education. And I support that. In fact, I have said it on the Senate floor, I want to go beyond that. But I think that's where this country is going now, is that we've got to address the issue of affordability, because that's a real problem here in this country now with colleges, that if we don't make changes soon, we're going to price the middle class out of college, and we can't do that. We can't do that here in America, okay? So a lot of states, the federal government is now looking at how we can pay for at least the first 2 years of college, and certainly we can do that by more dual credit programs, which we're having a lot of success in now. A number of students that I see are graduating with enough credits to, finish their first 2 years, and that's a step forward. So I think that's where we really need to go from a college perspective. We need to address that issue of affordability. We need to pump more money so that students can start at 4-year-olds, go all the way up to the time they're 20. And then if they want to go beyond that, find ways to address that. Because look, what are we doing now? We're saying that the debt that students incur to go to college is too high. And we're taking steps nationally to reduce that debt. And we need to continue to reduce that debt so we can encourage more and more students to go to college. So I think that's the policy initiative, to start thinking about education here in America from pre-K to at least 14, of grade 14.
So there are two topics that you all have touched on. Did you want to say something, Dr. Thomas, or did you want to leave this to
I just want to validate a couple of points that was made. What we know about 14-year-olds now, they want relevance and they want meaning, and they want to have a connection. And this is why everything that's been said I agree with. We've got to connect early with these students to look at exactly what those two things mean. Yes, it's going to take advising, it's going to take mentoring and all that, but it's also going to take us giving them the options to know what college is, the directions that they can go, but also the meaning and the value of education. We do have dual credit. We do have the Work Ready Scholarship that they can take while they're in high school. There's all kinds of things we can do here, and I agree with the systematic approach. And the idea that if we know that's where 14-year-olds are, they have experienced the pandemic, true enough. They are going to know more about digital learning, but they're also going to have a greater chance of being academically, socially, and emotionally behind. So what does that mean for us to start that conversation early with them, not only preparing them academically, but preparing them to actually face more rigors that obviously they're going to have. We know the mental health issue, we've heard a lot about it, but I would just want to validate that as a way of providing meaning, quality, and relevance.
Thank you. Senator Thomas mentioned the Work Ready Scholarship Program. In Tennessee, there's a program that was put in place 7 years ago called the Tennessee Promise, and it provides not only scholarships for free community and technical college, but also has a built-in mentoring program. You all know, and some of you may or may not know, but I also teach at Kentucky State University, and retention is a big problem, not at one place, but at all schools. A lot of kids come in, they don't stay. So Tennessee put that mentoring element, that mentoring segment in their program to deal with that. Work Ready applies to certain segments of the economy, students going into certain disciplines. So from a legislative point of view, is there any talk or discussion of maybe expanding Work Ready so that it might include components that are found in, say, a Tennessee Promise model or as found in other states like Washington or West Virginia?
I'll start.
Thank you.
Right, you're correct. The Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship right now is for individuals who are pursuing careers, degrees, certificates, credentials in 5 high-demand areas, employment areas in Kentucky. There have been conversations about expanding that scholarship. As you know, that is one of the scholarships that is currently funded by lottery proceeds into the state. So that's always a question that gets brought up. I have actually been engaged with Kia over the interim to talk about the possibility of including people going into wanting to be teachers in education. We have a serious issue with teacher workforce. So we are having those conversations. I think that we understand the need, but it also we have to understand where are the funds going to come from, how are we going to be able to fund this. So we have to balance those things out. But those are important conversations to have because the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship is just one tool of many tools that we have available. And how do we arrange these tools and fund these tools appropriately?
Okay. So for the record, you're saying that the conversations you're having are for perhaps expanding the Work Ready to apply to other disciplines, other majors in different programs.
Well,
Conversation at this point, I get it.
I can't speak for every legislator,
but-
but I'm having those conversations.
Okay, well, that's fine. Hey, I'm always looking for the news. I got to find the lead here. Okay, thank you.
I went back and looked in 2016, and Carl Rollins, you were still there. If you remember, we were still in majority in the House of Representatives, and our leadership at that time had a bill in which it would allow us to be basically give 2 years of going to school and being, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I have a teacher's voice anyway, so I'm sure most of you here will hear me. But let me go back. In 2016, I was talking about our leadership. At the time, we were in the majority of the House of Representatives. And all 5 members of our leadership proposed, and I don't know if you were there. And we basically tried to look at the Tennessee version, and we basically copied what the Tennessee version was, which would provide a viable affordability for students to go to a 2-year community college. The program was designed to help obtain training, certain certifications, as Representative Tipton talked about, that was in the demand. And for some reason, Governor Bevin basically vetoed the bill, portions of the bill, which we didn't feel. And so we were unable to do that. But I've always stated that any way that we can get kids interested in whatever areas they want, that we should provide that. And the Tennessee, as Representative Tipton has talked about, has been successful. It has been very successful in terms of getting kids to go on beyond K through 12. And so we as a state, if you look at the makeup of our state, we're doing really well here in this part of the state, what we call the Golden Triangle. But if you go down further west and out east, particularly east now with what has happened there, we need to try to bring incentives that want these kids or have these kids to stay in school, number one, but also see a future where they can invest in an area that may not be dealing with going to a college or university, but going to a technical school. And so we need to try to find ways in which we can encourage students to do that, but also be willing to bring forth the appropriations for students to be able to be successful at that. And I think that helps us in economic development, because if the eastern part of the state and the western part of the state is where we need to provide, and the governor is doing a great job in spreading out all these economic developments, but in certain areas we still need to focus on that, because if they are behind, the rest of us cannot move forward. We as a Commonwealth, for the good of all, should try to address those issues that impact us all across the Commonwealth.
Thanks. Senator, did you?
Representative Tipton and Representative Graham is absolutely correct. And Derrick, I got to tell you, I'm really glad you talk about that history, because history is so important in understanding why we are where we are. You know, people like Rocky Atkins and Sandy Overly really pushed to have the Work-Ready Scholarship available to all students. And you're right, it was Governor Bevin, along with certain other legislators, that said, no, we're just going to limit it to STEM. And I want to tell you, I don't have any problem with biologists. Biologists are important. And I don't have any problem with software engineers. We certainly, in the 21st century, need software engineers. And of course, we need mathematicians, okay? But what we also need in this country are historians. We've seen how important history is in learning, okay? We certainly need people who are interested in psychology. Lord knows we need more psychologists and people who deal in areas of mental health. And we need educators. And Laura, you're a journalist. You're going to tell me that journalists aren't important in this world today?
Enshrined in the Constitution.
So the Kentucky Work Ready Scholarship doesn't need to be limited just to STEM. It needs to be added to people who want to do history, or people who want to go into journalism, or people who want to go into education. It needs all people who want to focus on those areas as well, because those areas also are critical to our society.
Well, you heard my opening keynote yesterday. I called that we need to be focusing on getting the first 2 years of college free, 2-year or 4-year. And the reason why we need to do that is because in order for us to get to this 60% educational attainment by 2030, and let me tell you, that figure just didn't come out of the blue. As I said yesterday, it's correlated with having an economy in this state that thrives. And you're going to have more post-secondary educators there. The Tennessee model specifically focuses on adult learners. We can't get there without adult learners being engaged in this process. We're going to have to target what we have. Appreciate Representative Tipton says we need to look at the Work-Ready Scholarship and all of the items to look at it. We have to determine what's good for the state, for their quality of life, and for their economic thriving. And we know that, once again, you have to have higher education, a strong system to make it happen. Yes, you have to have a strong pre-K through 12 also, but just a 12th grade education, we know now, just doesn't get you very far. It may get you a job now, but you'll be out of it in several months, and you're going to have to return. The issue I would bring to the table as a policy issue, in addition to hopefully a legislative issue, is about having the strategic discussion about what does it mean if we don't start doing these things now. We can't wait on educators. You know how bad we are? I mean, we can't wait on mental health counselors. We can't wait on a variety of other things just simply because those are the current needs. So our policy agenda isn't for the future. It is for the future, obviously, but just isn't for that. It's also for, right now, the ability to look at where we need to go. I appreciate the conversation that each of these legislators has put on the table, simply because that is the way that we have to think. We do have a baseline. We have the work credit scholarship. We have the dual credit scholarship. We have keys. We have a variety of things that we have in place. We're one of the healthiest student financial aid states in the nation, and I appreciate all those that made that happen. But how do we target policy and dollars toward benefiting the needs of the state?
Well, I just wanted to follow up with Senator Thomas real quick. So Representative Tipton said in the House they're having conversations about enhancing work-ready scholarships, or maybe having conversations. Is that going on in the Senate as well? Have you guys talked about that, or?
We have talked about it. I mean, we do have really good collegiality in the Senate, and yes, we are having those conversations. And Representative Tipton and I talk quite a bit, outside just the chamber about where we want to go in education policy. So I do think we're having those conversations. I do think we're moving in the right direction. What does 2023 look like in the legislative session? Who knows at this point? But I think the discussions and the language and the interest is moving in the right direction, Laura.
Thank you.
I'm going to say this as well. Can you hear me? If you look at what we have in our reserves, we have about $3 billion that is there. And if you look at what has happened during this pandemic, the lottery is skyrocketed in terms of profits. And so if we're going to act, we need to act now with what we have. But I also want to say this about Representative Tipton. He's one of the finest men to serve in the General Assembly. His word is his bond. The fact that when we were going through the stabilization for Kentucky State University, you allowed me to come in and talk with you, and we discussed and we developed strategies as to what we needed to do, and you did a great deal of service, not only to Kentucky State University, but to higher education as well, because we're all in this as well. And what happens to one university could eventually happen to another university. And so I thank you for that. But I do think that we're going to build a foundation. Now is the time to build that foundation with what we have in reserves, as well as what the lottery has been taking in over the last 2.5 years. Thank you.
So with the scholarships and student loans and student loan forgiveness, are you guys seeing the money going to students or to the institutions for this type of thing? And then kind of a parallel with that is, how do we get to the root cause of the high cost of post-secondary education? Like, what are some of the root causes you see that need to be addressed? Kind of a twofold question there.
I'll start on that second part of your
Okay,
question.
thank you.
First, while I'm thinking about the first part. Prior to 2008, the university set the tuition. As you all know, CPE started in 2008. I believe it was 2008 when President Thompson, CPE started approving tuition rates. And if you look at the 10 years prior to 2008, 10 years before 2008, there were significantly higher tuition rates. So we have seen an adjustment to the good on tuition rates. I think part of the cost of higher education is, especially for those students who want that 4-year experience, as universities are doing P3 projects, putting in dorms in, nicer cafeterias, guess what? They cost more money. They're more expensive. And as we look through now, everything's just getting more expensive. That bundles with the fact that in 2008 we had a serious economic downturn. And there was a lot of belt tightening that went on. And it's taken a while to work our way out of that. With the 2022 budget, we saw significant improvements in the way we were able to fund post-secondary education. $8 million in performance funding pool, asset preservation dollars we've been trying to get for years. All universities have wanted out the top funding project, capital project approved. So we saw some positive steps, and we need to continue to build on that as we do have more resources available now. We have to remember we don't know what the economy is going to do, so we have to be cautious of that. Now is an opportunity. I don't know how much is going to take place in 2023 as far as funding, since it's a non-budget year, but I think we're open to having those conversations for specific needs for how we can invest. And I think a lot of it goes back to where those funds go to. You may not be aware, but in the budget, we increased funding for CAP PG grants. Right now, a student who is Pell eligible in Kentucky can attend any Kentucky school except one and have all tuition fees paid. For example, I'm sorry, UK is just a little bit more expensive. You're close. But on all the rest of the institutions, all tuition fees. Now, Senator Thomas made a point earlier about those middle-income family students. And I think that's a real challenge. Those who aren't Pell eligible. And I think those are some things we need to continue to work at. I know that we continue to talk about the key scholarship, that's our merit-based scholarship. So we have to continue to have these conversations. As far as the student loan forgiveness, I think we're going to have to see what the impact of that is. I know you may not realize this, but as a result of what's happened in the student loan industry in Kentucky, the changes that have been made, for the first time ever, the General Assembly had to fund $6 million per year to KID. Previously, they'd been able to fund themselves based on servicing the loans through CASELET. We had to put $6 million a year in. And as we have more student loan forgiveness, I anticipate there'll be a greater need for us to support that organization that administers our scholarships and grants. So I think we're going to have to see the full impact of that. But I think our students need to understand that maybe there's a mixed model, maybe some on campus, some online. But for that student who wants that traditional 4-year experience, it's going to cost a little more money. But they need to make sure that they have that financial literacy, that they know that they're in a situation where they have a plan. Don't just graduate and hope you get a job and then start paying on student loans. You need to have a plan, and that's where I think we need to do more work on the front end.
Thank you. Representative Graham, did you?
No, I think he covered it all. I do think that if you look at the students in Kentucky, over 209,000 Kentucky students will be completely free of debt. And that's good for the economy, for those who will stay here in Kentucky. But I think it's a work in progress in terms of what we can do to see how what is happening now, how we can build upon that, as Representative Tipton talked about. But we've got a lot of decisions to make here in the next 2 years as to the direction of how our students who are graduating and who don't have that indebtedness, that whopping indebtedness, and addressing what we need to do to build upon the future, because things will change, as we know, depending upon the politics, that's number one, and depending upon how our economy is performing over that period of time.
Okay. Senator Thomas, did you have anything to?
Well, Laura, you know, I always got something to add. You know, there's no one right way to do things. It really takes a multitude of approaches. I think here's the problem, and I'll go back to what Representative Thompson said. From 2008 to 2020, we cut state universities' budgets by 42%. Okay? In fact, they're still not getting the same state dollars they did in 2008. In fact, we were the last state in the union in 2020, when Governor Beshear came into office, to start increasing the appropriation to state universities again. Okay? So with that cut in appropriations they were getting for 12 straight years, they had to make it up somehow. They had to make it up, you know, through tuition hikes and other things. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone that I'm going to defend UK. Okay? And UK doesn't just compete with Kentucky universities. You know, UK competes with the Ohio State universities and the University of Michigans and Virginias for students. It competes for your top institutions for students. And of course, they got to get the faculty, pay the faculty, a good faculty to do that, and pay good resources to do that. So you know, I understand where institutions like University of Kentucky, you know, have to spend their money, but it'll compete for good students. And University of Kentucky is a very good school. So I get that. I also understand, as I said before, that we cannot price the middle class out of college, okay? Because we all understand that it's our education system and our college system and our middle class that has made America the greatest nation in the world. And yes, we are the greatest nation in the world because of that. And we need to continue to be able to make education affordable to all. I think Representative Tipton is right, that we have to impose some kind of financial literacy on students. I think students sometimes do mismanage the money they receive. He's right about that. Okay? At the same time, we do have to start funding and financing higher education at an acceptable rate so that the need for tuition hikes isn't as great as it was, you know, during the years from 2008 to 2020. So all those things come into play and have to work together in some kind of symbiosis, Laura, to achieve what we need to achieve so we can get more students into college, get them graduated, but get them to understand how to finance their education so there aren't mounds of debt. I want to close with this. I'm not opposed at all to spending $6 million out of our treasury so that students have less debt to pay. I'm okay with that because the reality is that you have students coming out of college today with $40,000, $50,000 in debt. And they can't do a number of things for years. They can't buy homes, they can't get married, they can't really start their lives because the debt is overwhelming. So we do need to cut the student debt in this country so that these young people can come out and start living.
So 2023 is not a budget year, as Representative Tipton said, but is there conversation, I think a lot of people in this room want to know, does there seem to be in the General Assembly the tone that support for higher education is there as a whole? Like, are you getting some buy-in from your colleagues or pushback, or what's the tenor of the conversations for that? Anybody who wants to go? I'm seeing some smirks, so it's...
I seem to get to go first. I think there is, like I said, I think there will be reluctance to deal with a lot of budget issues in 2023. There are some things we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to come up with more additional dollars for Eastern Kentucky, those sorts of things. I think there are going to be some specific programs that time is of the essence that we need to get implemented. So I think there will be some appropriations made, but by and large, I look for 23 in the interim leading into 24 to be more of an information gathering, seeing just exactly where our economy, if it continues to maintain on the same pace that it is. I have not heard what the Federal Reserve did today. Maybe some of you know, but you know, rising interest rates, possibility going into a recession. All those things are up in the air right now. So I think we're going to take a very cautious approach. And one thing that has not been talked about that I think has really contributed, and I'm not pointing fingers here today, but when I came into the General Assembly in 2015, the public pension unfunded liability was overwhelming, and it continues to be overwhelming. And we've made some decisions. 24 years from now, whoever sits in these seats are going to have a much easier job because those unfunded liabilities are on track to be paid off in TRS and in KRS. So you're talking about a tremendous amount of dollars that are going to be freed up to invest in Kentucky. So in the meantime, we have to manage how do we pay for our obligations that we have to our dedicated retirees, and how do we invest for our citizens. So it's a constant balancing act. And so I think there is an openness to have conversations about this,
But I also think that the tone of the General Assembly is on expectations. We don't want to just spend money. We don't want to just appropriate money. We want to see it invested where we'll get a return on that investment, where it'll impact the lives of our Kentucky citizens.
Let me address the issue about whether or not there is a, you didn't use this term, but I'm going to use it, a war on the higher education. I would agree with my colleague, Representative Tipton, but it is a war on public education. And I'll just say this, public education is the feeder to higher education. And I will say this, I put my kids in private school, but that was a decision that my wife and I made to do that. They eventually went to public school. However, if we do not invest more in public education, K through 12, then you in the higher education system will see it when it gets there. And we cannot afford to divert money for people to go to a private or parochial school. That's fine, I support that, but I supported it the same way that those before me. We made the decision, we paid for it, not the public. It is not the public's right. We have a responsibility from the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to provide for public education, K through 12, and even our universities. So our first priority should be toward public education. We should not be taking money from public education, whether it's K through 12 or colleges, and giving them to individuals who are able to afford of sending their children to either parochial or private schools. The other thing that I want to say about performance funding, I think particularly we have not done it in the right way. I think what we should have done, and this is only my opinion, but we should have based it upon what the universities were doing based upon year to year and to see if they were making progress with graduation rates, with students staying in and continuing. Because it's not fair for all the comprehensive schools to be compared to what's going on with the University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, and even Kentucky State University, which opens its doors to many students who some of the schools across the Commonwealth would not allow them in. And yet they have a higher successful rate in terms of graduation rates now. And so I just think that the policies that we set in forth, I think many of us possibly may agree with some, but we have a different direction in which we want to take it. So.
Thanks. Well, since you brought up performance-based funding, that's obviously a big issue. Senate Bill 135, which Senator Givens carried in the 2021 regular session, saw a couple changes to that model. One created a funding floor rather than a formula-based amount. In the 2023 session, can we expect to see any changes to performance-based funding in the legislature? Senator Thomas? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to let Reggie go.
No, James, I'll be glad to take the lead on this.
I mean, like tweaks to the legislation kind of thing.
I first want to go back to what Representative Tipton said. Again, I do think accountability is important. That's something that we have to teach as a value. We were taught that in our generation. We need to continue to teach that going forward in the younger generations. I do think that when we appropriate money, for areas of education, we should expect our colleges, one, to enroll a representative number of students, whatever students they can carry, that they retain those students and they graduate those students. So I do think there should be some expectations there, and they should be monitored, okay? And if those numbers are low, then certain measures and steps and expectations should be in place so that colleges can continue to enroll a large number of students, to retain those students, and to graduate those students. Because, again, that's our money, and we want to spend it wisely. So Representative Tipton is right on there. However, Representative Graham makes a point, and I wouldn't just limit it to Kentucky State. I want to be very frank with you. You've got schools like Morehead State and Murray State who are also in trouble, okay? They aren't getting the monies that they need in order to make it. And so now I'm answering your question, Laura, which is I do think we need to set a floor by which schools like Kentucky State, Morehead, and Murray, can always get the money that they need, to be able to do the things they need to do to meet the expectations and demands of their own communities. Far Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, and Kentucky State here in Central Kentucky, and as Representative Graham so appropriately pointed out, the kind of constituency that Kentucky State University serves. He's absolutely right about that. I certainly support performance funding, and I voted for it. I do think you need to reward schools who again, are meeting those three criteria. Their enrollments are up, their retention rate is up, and they're graduating a large number of students. Because again, as Dr. Thompson pointed out, we need those people to stay here in Kentucky and contribute to Kentucky, in years 2040, 2050, and on through the 21st century. So we got to reward those universities that do that. So again, it's a balancing act. There's just it's no one size fits all. But fortunately, here in Kentucky now, we're very fortunate. We have the resources to do that. And if a university is falling down on those areas, then we can step in and provide the supports they need to make sure that our money is being spent wisely.
I want to add a couple of points I think is important. First of all, legislation calls for us to relook at the performance funding model, and we will officially bring the group back together in January, I will tell you that. But I want to say another item too, and I want to get to the affordability question quickly and give you my 2 cents on this. But it's important for us to understand that our campuses have different missions, no doubt. But we're going to have to be able, in order to really do the things we need to do, we are a return on investment. We're a strategic return on investment. 62% return on investment for every state dollar put in to higher ed. And also, when we do that, we're also helping some of the other areas that you're spending money on. Prisons, Medicaid. I keep on going forever, right? So, first of all, I want to make that as an important piece of the conversation. But we're going to have to start putting some of the money to base, at least to get we can't do this without good, top quality faculty. We just can't. And we're going to have to figure out how to do this in a way that makes sense. We can't do it without buildings. Thank goodness for asset preservation. I know I'm going a little bit longer here, but you have to understand, we had buildings falling down. Yes, we were cut for many years, but over that length of time, campuses also put $1.2 billion of their own money into asset preservation state buildings, just to keep them up, all kinds of stuff. Affordability is an important piece, quickly I want to say. Think of affordability not just in people going to college and figuring out how to pay for it. If they get a degree, that's affordability. If they get a quality degree or certificate in a fast manner, that's affordability. If we can look at how to streamline the process with curricular processes from high school on, that's affordability. Student loans aren't bad, folks. It's an investment if they get a degree that can pay for it or a certificate that can pay for it. Their student right to know is giving them that information up front. How do we get them there? We have the lowest, we did in the last several years, the lowest tuition ever in history in Kentucky, averaging about 1.2% a year. So it's not just about the tuition. It really is a holistic way that we have to think about it. Yes, the legislature needs to invest in their best strategic investment, no doubt. But if we think about what we're called to do as policymakers and those of us who kind of shape and place policy, we have to think about what is the outcome for these students we want. They need to have lower debt, but debt isn't bad. I want to say that. Debt is only bad if they can't pay for it. If they get a certificate that they can't pay for it, or if they don't get a certificate, That's really bad. So I think it takes a strategic conversation, Laura, to get us where we need to go. The performance funding model is working, but there's tweaks that's going to happen for us to move it into the future in the way that the state has asked us to. One last bit. Any performance funding model has to include equity, because if we leave any of our low-income people behind, students of colors and others, without them getting that quality degree, I can't not argue we have a quality education system, period, whether it's P-12 or higher ed.
Thank you. I'll pick up on your equity issue with my next question. So in the strategic plan, the CPE notes, and I quote, "In reality, our nation has not provided a level playing field for all of its citizens," close quote. The plan also says 36.1% of white Kentuckians have a college degree, but that rate drops to 28.6% for African Americans, 26.7% for Hispanic people, and 25.4% for Native Americans. How can the General Assembly help advance inclusivity and diversity at the Commonwealth's colleges and universities? What policies can the state put in place to close those achievement gaps between white and minority students?
I'll start off on that. First, I want to give you a direct answer to your last question.
Oh, thanks.
Will the General Assembly address performance-based funding in 23? No.
Okay, thank
The
you.
working group will meet again in 23,
January.
and I'm sure there will be recommendations for the 24 session, which is a budget session. So I don't see any scenario where that. But I want to talk
Thank
about, in relation to your most recent question, I think we have seen some of the metrics that were put in place for performance-based funding are starting to see some real tangible results. The number of degrees from underrepresented minorities, for one. And I think those are things we need to continue to look at. We're looking for outcomes. And we need to, this is an issue that is talked about a lot across our country. Everybody needs to be treated fairly and with respect. Unfortunately, there are people, due to a lot of times it's economic circumstances. Now, some of those are related to race issues and historical generational poverty. So we've got to focus on our educational system all the way through. Too many times we've talked about silos. We have to think about education from, I think, a P through 20 aspect. Later today, I hope you get a chance to attend the reception for the Commonwealth Education Continuum over in Frankfurt at 5, so come on over for that, Berry Hill Mansion at 5 o'clock. And that's part of that work. But we have to continue to, as we reevaluate performance-based funding, that's just one way that we can do it, is make sure that we have programs in place to make sure that everybody has equitable opportunities to succeed. As we all know, not everybody, I could go up and face a major league pitcher, and I'm probably not going to, I may have an opportunity to hit, but I'm not going to have much success. But everybody needs to have the tools, the opportunities to get out there and succeed in life. And those are the types of things that we need to focus on as we do our funding, as we set policy at the state level.
Thank you. How can the General Assembly help advance inclusivity and diversity?
Well, I think one of the things that we've done in Kentucky State with Simmons College in terms of trying to work with the students at both of those institutions and getting young people, particularly African-American males, for example, to become teachers and to work within the agencies of or within the universities of Kentucky State and Simmons College. I think that's a good example of how we can do that, put more African-American males into the classroom, because we need that. But I do think that we also, and I'll just say this, because the university, Kentucky State University, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Kentucky State University. I'm a proud graduate of the university. I'm a third-generation graduate of Kentucky State University. So just as your alma mater is important to you, it's important to me that I address those issues that my university faces. But I do believe that there is room for all of our universities to be well-funded, but also that we have the opportunity of helping them when they need help. And this thing is all about politics, and let me just say this, why I'm saying this. The University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville, they're going to always have that support because Louisville is the largest city. They have a whole lot more legislators who are there, if I'm not mistaken. A quarter of the legislators, almost a quarter of the legislators are from Jefferson County. And there's no Republican or Democrat when it comes to the university, and that's great. The University of Kentucky is the flagship school, so everyone's going to always be supportive of the flagship school, and it should be. But with the regional schools, if you break it down, and I'm not being critical, I'm just showing the elements of politics in the Kentucky General Assembly. Murray has Western Kentucky legislators who identify with the university. They may not be graduates, but you have a voice, and you have more voices because you have counties down there, along with Western, the same way. They're within a region where all the representatives and the senators there basically work with Western to do what needs to be done for Western. Eastern and Morehead, the same way. They have legislators who are within central Kentucky, but more so in eastern Kentucky, and both of those universities serve those areas. But if you look at Kentucky State University, it is between the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville, and you have very little focus on that university. And I'm saying this because the history lessons should show that it's not just been now, it's been in the past. When our former president Atwood would go to the university or come from the university to go to the Capitol to sit down and talk to the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and they would bring them all in to come and to meet with the governors. But in his books and in what he's left of his papers, he talked about how when he went in, he was always the last one to go in. And he was not referred by his status, but also given a name that none of us want to say at times, depending upon who the governor was. So I say that because there is history. There is history there for each university, whether it's comprehensive or the University of Louisville or the University of Kentucky. But the goal is that we all work together, as I said, and I think that is the most important thing. You shouldn't be Murray against Western, or Eastern against Morehead, or the University of Louisville against Kentucky. All of those boards need to work together, but the presidents need to, and I think you all do that, but it comes down to a dog-eat-dog, and I see it every year, and I don't mean any harm by that, but self-preservation is the first law of nature. And the main thing that we need to focus on is what's right for the region and the people, but most important, what's right for our students. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Thomas?
You know, Laura, I'm not often speechless, but I think Representative Graham just said it well. There's nothing I can add to what he said. All I'm going to say is this. You know, thank you, Reverend Akins.
So is Reverend Akins saying don't add anything? It's time to move on.
You know, one of my mentors and friends out there. And Reverend Akins, you'll appreciate this. You know, equity and diversity and inclusion are intentional. I mean, we can have that tomorrow if people say, I'm going to make it a priority to make sure that I include everybody and have a well-rounded faculty and well-rounded administrators and well-rounded student body. It's all about what one intentionally wants to do. And really, we have to do that, whether we will do that or not. You can put all kind of guardrails in place, but you know, as we've seen historically, and see, this is why I said STEM needs history, because you know I appreciate Representative Graham's always reference to history. Okay, people find a way to get around that, and if policymakers don't enforce that, you know, then the status quo will continue and continue. So it's all about intentionality. And what we intentionally want to see occur as policymakers, and as university and higher education leaders going forward as to how much we really value diversity and inclusion in our education system. I thought you said it real well, Derrick.
So we're about at the end of our time, but you said we could have a few extra minutes of your closing time. Is that still okay? Because I have 2 more questions I'd like to just throw out there. They're not as long, I don't think. But I know. Well, I just wanted to make a point, too, with inclusivity. There's a lot of talk, and this is maybe obviously a conversation for another time, but LGBTQ rights and issues are coming to the forefront as well in academia, which that could include the inclusivity and diversity as well. So another rather quick question. The Council on Post-Secondary Education, the University of Kentucky, Northern Kentucky University, and probably other schools out there have included in their strategic plans a call for greater public trust, transparency, and accountability. What can the General Assembly do to help hold universities accountable to the citizens of Kentucky? And is that even your role? I mean, is it something that you guys need to be involved in?
I'm just asking us about.
How can you help hold universities accountable to the public? So the public gives all this money to the schools, and then how are we to hold the schools accountable and in a transparent manner for the money we give them?
Well, I think that goes with the responsibility of those who serve on the Board of Regents and the board, the governing board of Kentucky and Louisville. That's why you are appointed by the governor, and the Senate approves those nominations, and it should be upon the governing board to basically make sure that the universities are operating in the way in which the taxpayers, expect them to do. Now, there could be some legislation in terms of oversight and that sort of thing, but it should really come down to those who are serving on the governing boards of each of our universities.
I think Representative Graham makes a great point that those board members do have a responsibility. But also I think the legislature has an oversight responsibility. We are the voice of the people. We live in a republic where we are as elected legislators. We are there to be their voice. I think a lot of this, there's been so much emotional. I think if you go back to social media, we have all these emotional debates that are going on across the world, across the country now, across our state, on all these social type issues. And there are people that have differing opinions. They feel very strongly about these opinions. I think the best thing we can do is people do not know how to positively vent their frustrations anymore. I think the most important thing we can do is just sit down as people and have conversations with each other. I may have a conversation with somebody, we may have differing views, but hopefully when we get done, we'll have a better understanding of where each of us are coming from. So we have to have these types of conversations. I don't think these issues are going away because they're very prevalent in our society right now. You have people who are very strong advocates on both sides of some of these issues. But we need to have an open, honest conversation. And sometimes there are situations, I think you're probably going to see legislation. If you get elected, you can file a bill. So there's always a lot of bills filed. A lot of them don't always go anywhere. But I think it is true. But we have to keep an open mind and work together. And I've learned in life that everything's not going to always happen just the way I see it. My world sees it through my vision. But we got to learn to live together. And the key thing is even when we disagree with each other, we have to learn to respect each other. And I hope that's something on our university campuses and in our legislators and in our families, our churches, and everywhere across society we can continue to do, because these type of conversations are not going to go away.
Thank you. Senator Thomas, accountability.
Yes, Laura, and actually I'm going to throw the ball to my dear friend here, Dr. Thompson, in just a minute, because I want to hear what he has to say about this. But, you know, Representative Graham is right. We know now what these schools are doing with inclusivity and diversity. You know, we know now, you know, what their minority enrollment is on their student body. We know now, you know, what their faculty representation is with regard to minorities. You know, we know now, you know, what their level of diverse representation is in their administrators. So we have that information now. You know, it's all about what we do with it. I mean, let's not forget that just a month ago there was this big controversy in newspapers about what UK was doing in terms of their advances with regard to increases in their minority student body, their faculty, and their administrators compared to what U of L was doing, and how that had shifted over the course of 20 years. So there's been that debate. So we got the numbers. It's all about, once we get the numbers, if they're good, fine. If they're not so good, what we do about it. And having said that, Dr. Thompson, I'm going to shift the microphone over to you.
Well, I think we have to talk about what accountability is there for. To me, accountability is here for making sure that students get the best education possible, and our campuses are open to dialogue and debate in a reasonable, civic way, and that's important. Now, oversight, I'm glad Henry's still here, and Gardner, we're talking with our boards now. What does that mean for student success, in addition to all the other stuff, right? Whether it's dollars, the fiduciary responsibility, all that. We need, obviously, thank you, Representative Graham, for putting that law in place. That's where we're at. CPE is an oversight body in many ways. So we got a lot of oversight, but transparency is the key here. We got the student right to know as an example. First one in the nation. It tells you a whole lot, right, in many ways. The other thing I will say when it comes to oversight, we have performance-based funding. If you argue what we are supposed to do, you see it. We have a progressive diversity policy that looks at a variety of things. So accountability is not just about what we're not doing, it's about what we should be doing. We have to build a pipeline for more diverse teachers, more diverse professors, staff, no doubt about it in that area. But we also have to be able to have dialogue. You learn more from people different than you do from people like you. So how can we have the dialogue on our campuses? Representative Tipton, I fully agree. If you are having a civil conversation, the place you should be able to have it more than any place else is on a college campus. So the idea that to some degree, we're not just saying let us govern ourselves, but we are saying accountability should be a forward-thinking, progressive action more than just looking back and see what you haven't done, but really trying to put in place those things that you should be doing to ensure that Kentucky's students are getting the best learning possible.
Thanks. And then last question. I mean, I have more, but it's the last one I'll ask for now. I think it was in the 2020 session, State Representative Regina Huff sponsored House Bill 87, which would have required high school seniors to fill out the FAFSA, the federal financial aid form. That bill passed the House. It died in the Senate, so we'll let Senator Thomas answer first. But can we expect to see something like that on the horizon in 2023?
Well, Laura, I'm going to be direct. I hope so. As a matter of fact, I just saw Regina a couple hours ago because we had an education committee meeting today. And that was a good bill. I can't answer why it didn't come to the Senate floor. If it had come to the Senate floor, I would have voted for it. Again, we need to take several different measures to try to make college accessible and affordable to all, and that was a good step. That was a good bill. Representative Huff is leaving the legislature, but I hope that bill comes back again. If it comes to the Senate floor, I will vote for it.
Thanks. Do you mind if we leave Dr. Thompson with the last word on that, because then we can just roll it over to, what about FAFSA? You gentlemen support the filling out the
I
form?
have supported that legislation. It actually had legislation in 2021 that got derailed in the House. There was a lot of misinformation about the bill that was put out there, and it really derailed that in the House. But I think we all understand the importance that there are opportunities out there for students to get financial aid that they're not aware of. And I think one of the big objections to the legislation is it was set up as a requirement for high school graduation. However, there were very specific waiver processes put in there where the principal could work with the student. A lot of times students, maybe their family's not involved or not willing to help them with that financial information. So there were some things that were put in there. I'm hopeful that we can come up with that, because I think that will help college affordability tremendously and help us students understand those opportunities. So many times it's an education process and educating the members, and sometimes it doesn't take much misinformation to disrail something.
Thank you.
I initially was opposed to the bill because I, as a teacher, I know some students come from homes that their parents either cannot read or write or are very afraid to fill out any form based upon what they think will hurt them in terms of who are receiving public assistance. But I think that that could be worked out with school counselors as well as parents coming in with those students. Once again, it's one more thing that we're asking the counselors to do, but that's part of their responsibility, is getting the kids ready for the next level, whether they're going into the workforce or whether they're going to go to a school of higher education or to a vocational school. So I don't have a problem with it as long as there are some guidelines within that allow the parent and the student to understand that it's not going to do anything in terms of hurting them. It's really out to help them.
Good. Thank you. Dr. Thompson, we'll leave you with the last word. Do you want the podium?
I'll come up and give the final overall stuff here in a second. Let me just say this from this seat. You know, all of our campuses support FAFSA legislation. As you all know, I have, every time it's come up, been very loud about it. And the reason why we have, and I've been saying this now, as many know, for the last 5 years, our college going rates getting lower, and the people that are most affected are low-income people and people of color not going in. What if we imagined ourselves having a system whereby you don't opt in to college or opt in to knowing how to pay for college? What if it was an opt-out system? What if it was a situation where every senior in high school knew in their transcript they've been accepted to XYZ college? Think about how they would start thinking about themselves as having to be, they're college ready, people know that they're wanted and they can do college. Imagine if we had a system set up to where every student, if they wanted to have help in FAFSA, after we gave them good literacy information, Luke, let them know how to pay for it. This One Direction is a 36 item now, thank goodness, but if we gave them that help, what would be more advantageous for our economy and for our citizens than for many of those students who are left out? We leave somewhere around $50 million of federal aid on the table every year, you know, because of that. When I was president at KSU the one year, I went there and there were so many students that hadn't paid. Raymond is here somewhere. I know he can verify that. And so we looked at there, you know, it was somewhere around about 35% hadn't filled out a FAFSA. I mean, and didn't know it, as Rick can tell you. We helped them fill it out. The point I'm trying to make is we can work through the bureaucratic stuff, but we should be thinking about what does this mean for our students and our citizens? How can we stop some of the bureaucracy that gets us bogged down and create a way of finding solutions that kind of get us where we need to go? If there are problems with that, I think we are smart enough to figure out how to fix those problems, but we have to put good policy on the table based on the information we have. Look at the data, look at the analytics, look at the prescriptive stuff I talked about yesterday. Where will we be in 10 years if we don't do something like this? So that would be my last statement on that.
Very good. Well, that's it. Thank you, gentlemen. It's very interesting. Thank you. Oh, thank you.